Storytelling is an art. I have often heard people lament that storytelling is best reserved to those who are naturally gifted, those who have a flair for the craft and can express it through the spoken word on stage or theatre, cinema, or the written word in books, stories, and scripts, or brushstrokes on a canvas, visual design, photography, and puppetry. At some level, I agree with these diverse and intricate applications of storytelling as an art. However, there is also this restrictive, non inclusive aspect of looking at art as something that is beyond any of us. So, what happens to oral storytelling when we set it up on the pedestal of higher art? Does it mean that the commoner, untrained, or novice cannot set out to practice storytelling? Moreover, does that make the storyteller an inferior artist? Welcome to episode 3 of the Storied Way Perspective. I am Rituparna and I am your host, the gatherer of stories, perspectives, and worldviews that tell us how is storytelling shaping the world today. The guests on this show are champions of the craft, and they tell me how are they using this form in their life and work. Coming up on this episode is Kapil Pandey, an artist who wears multiple hats as a children's author, poet, singer, drama educator, and performance storyteller. I have known Kapil for a while now, and we have performed together several times. He's someone I deeply admire, respect, and value as an artist and a peer. In this conversation, I try to break down and understand Kapil's approach to his art. No matter who you are and how you look at storytelling, I hope you will find a perspective that's admirable and replicable. This episode is a unique blend of an older conversation that we had in 2022 and some new perspectives. Parts of what you will hear today was recorded as an interview 2 years back. The newer parts of us are reflective and analytical. You will hear both the younger and slightly older and hopefully wiser versions of us. You can listen to this as a then and there and here and now version of two storytellers. I hope you enjoyed this listening experience of hearing Kapil Pandey and me deliberate about art, artist, and artistry. Let's begin with a throwback to a conversation in 2022.
For those of you who've not seen Kapil perform live, he comes dressed. He will wear his dhoti, his kurta, he wear his, carry his little drum or his beautiful guitar, and he'll come and sing. So my first question to you is, Kapil, let's talk about art. Okay, and I've been aching to have this conversation with you about art, artist, artistry. I think we've had a conversation about that. You are a writer, an author, a poet. You use shairi, you use poetry, you do drama, you do storytelling, and then you do music. So there's so many forms of art that you're already dabbling in. How does Kapil Pandey, look at art?
How do I look at art? Look, I think I kind of look at it in a very, very selfish way. I think for me, all of this that you mentioned, maybe not as much drama, but certainly music and writing and storytelling, of course. These are ways for me to get closer to myself, reveal myself a little more to me, to myself. And I think, that's pretty much why I begin to tell a story, begin to pick up the guitar, to sort of get to know a side of myself, which perhaps was, I didn't know I knew, kind of a thing. So that's what it is. That is what art is to me. And I think that is inward, but there is and when I'm able to do that, when I'm able to find that strand of myself, when I say myself, I mean my sense of worldview, my sense of socio-political views, my sense of self, then I also try and see if there is a way for me to to, or if there's a medium for me to articulate that, to send it out, to share it. And I think all these forms put together really are very, very enriching, because each time I share it, then the sharing itself starts revealing so much about what I think, and it's a very sort of a very critical. I mean, at the risk of, I mean, I know all this sounds very narcissistic in a way, but it's also very critical. It's also very constantly checking, asking of myself. So, yeah, I don't know whether I've answered your question, but yeah.
When I revisited Kapil with this question, he had another way of articulating it. Now, that's the curious thing about storytelling and how we look at it. Ask us the same question 2 years apart, and we will have newer ways to answer the same question. It is both a reflection of who we are and what we are doing with our craft.
So I think I look at art as an expression of what I feel about something. I think we use the adjectives we use to articulate how we feel about something, feeling sad and or happy or sense of compassion, etc., etc. They do great disservice to how one feels about something. I think art helps retain the complexity of that feeling. In my case, poetry and storytelling enable me to communicate that feeling. First to myself, and then to the world around me. I don't know who said this. Was it Tolstoy or Oscar Wilde? I think Tolstoy. That art is the transmission of feelings the artist has experienced. That really resonates with me. And more often than not, this feeling that comes out in the form of a poem or a doha or a story is a revelation to the artist in me as well.
I grew up in a traditional Bengali household that valued the arts very deeply. Back in the 80s and 90s, pursuing art and learning to appreciate in literature, music, and dance was a very natural thing. As a child, I was enrolled into 3 art forms: music, fine arts, and dance. My parents made sure I start early. However, I had other plans. I gave up Rabindra Sangeet because my Guruji didn't go beyond the 7 notes until I perfected them. As a grown up, I regret the 10-year-old's impatience. As a performance storyteller, I miss the skill of being a trained singer. As a child, I dragged my fingers through the canvas for many years, but I rarely felt inspired by brushstrokes. That's another art form that I didn't indulge willingly. Today, I doodle and tell stories and have fun owning my imperfect drawings. It's strange how art teaches you something when the time is right. Dance, however, was a completely different thing. I learned Bharatanatyam and pursued it with all my heart. I'm glad I did that because that's what has given me the confidence to find the artist within me and claim her identity. So that's my background in art. I feel everyone, irrespective if you're a storyteller or no, everyone should surround themselves with art, some form of it, precisely for the same reason that Kapil mentioned earlier. If an artist looks at art as an expression of the inner world, then by experiencing art as a viewer, listener, or a reader, one also finds a way to express themselves. This form of self expression is completely new and alien to many people I train today. If you have never appreciated expression or experienced how art makes you feel from within, you somewhere lack the confidence of how your story may impact your listener. When I asked Kapil He told me that he had trained in theatre, both in theory and form. He picked up the guitar as an adult and Hindustani vocals when a Guruji visited their home to teach his daughter and him. The question I asked him then was, is it important for storytellers to experience art?
I mean, if you go back to what I said about how I look at art, I think it is very crucial for storytellers to be in touch with their feelings to experience art. And very often, the idea of getting in touch with one's feeling is much easier said than done. So we also need multiple pathways, multiple crafts sometimes that help us do that. And I think that's the reason, the idea of arts and crafts sort of, as a combo word, as a together word exists. They're meant to complement each other, lean on each other, aid each other. For me, these pathways, these crafts are music, poetry, drama. And perhaps that's also the reason that these very crafts become tools for me to communicate with my audience during an act of storytelling. So I'd say find a method or two to access how you truly feel about something. That method could be a craft. It could be a diary entry that you do every day, an act of journaling. It could be generally, talking to yourself every day. That really helps. Find stories that latch on to that feeling, latch on to its context, its situation, and then look for tools that best communicate that story and that feeling as a combo, as a combination to yourself. I think that is a great way to experience your own art and to help hone it.
2 years back, when I asked Kapil the same question, he had another remarkable take. To be a storyteller, it is not just important to surround yourself with art, but also distance yourself from it. Sounds like an oxymoron, I know. It makes a lot of sense when you hear it from Kapil. Here is how he explained it to me.
To also start looking at the art form critically, and it's to also see what are the gaps that this art form brings to the table. Because what happens is that each time we pick up an art form, we tend to lean towards it. We kind of become we have this confirmation bias towards it, that okay, this is what works. And most storytellers would therefore say that there's power in it, there is magic in it.
Also what happens is everybody's doing it this way, so this must be the right way to do it.
Yeah. And therefore, we also kind of do not want to check whether there are other issues with it. Is there something that it can, for instance, a lot of stories and story in the wrong hands, because of the power it brings to the table perhaps is a problem. Then why is it a problem? And if you start looking at vis-a-vis children, is it possible that, am I at the risk of telling a story that is finally one story that has a beginning and an end, and therefore perhaps more or less one perspective to deal with? Have I actually incapacitated the child? Have I actually disempowered the child by telling that story to her, and not allowed the child, while the story was on, to kind of reflect, because the child was so much in awe of and emotionally moved by, and perhaps submitted to the whole idea of the flow of the story, that he or she did not have the power, so to speak, to disagree or to argue. Forget about disagreeing maybe, but at least to argue or to reflect. And I think when each of us start looking at those gaps, to me, the whole idea of art starts happening then, because that's the time when we start for lack of better word, start innovating.
As a storyteller, trainer, and coach, I work with people who do not look at storytelling from an artistic point of view. I mean, they may consider it as an art, but they may not invest their attention and time in perfecting, polishing, and performing stories as an artist. Think of a business leader, a manager, an entrepreneur, a teacher, or a fundraiser. When any of them tells a story, they don't tell it as an artist, and they don't need to. Yet, there is an inherent transactional exchange in their storytelling, and they have to do their job well for their story to leave an impact. You see, story is a powerful tool. It can put you to sleep or wake you up. It can paint a mirage or hold up the mirror. It can be spun to make you the victim or feel like the savior. A story can be manipulated, it can be weaponized. In that case, it can show you a part of the world that you were ignorant about, or it can hide that part of the world and tell you a story that everything is fine. In that case, the storyteller has the ability to become greater than the story. As much as we invest in our identities of being the storyteller, we must also turn an analytical eye to those who we tell stories with. The question, therefore, is can the story and the teller be distanced?
So, about the artist getting greater than the art, about that part, my views are slightly eccentric. In case of storytelling, and today's day and age of storytelling, I think the idea of the artist just being the medium and the story being greater than the teller doesn't work for me. Perhaps it worked back in the day during the time of the Sautis when their job was to maintain the integrity of the story that was being passed on. I don't think today's storyteller has the privilege or the opportunity to stay smaller than her art. It is the very combination of the story and the teller that completes the art today. You cannot separate one from the other. So, I mean, to me, this debate also is rather pointless, because to me, both the story and the teller are somewhere part of one continuum. And this is unlike an author who's writing a book, or a visual artist who's painting a piece of visual art, or sculpting for that matter. In those cases, as this French philosopher Roland Barthes puts it, the artist may as well die after creating the art, after the art is in the hands of the reader, in the case of a book, or the viewer in the case of a sculpture or a visual art. Because the reader or the viewer has the agency to interpret that piece of art, that piece of literature, the way he or she perceives it, reads it, interprets it. In storytelling, however, the art and the artist present themselves together, and therefore the artist's sense of worldview, her politics, her pauses, her stresses, her scoffs, her smirks, her stepping out of the story to look at the story as a voyeur from time to time, her stepping into a role or not, her questions to the story, to herself, to her world, are all part of the act. I don't think the storyteller should even pretend to hide them. But this is the power that the storyteller wields, whether she likes it or not. So she kind of has a Spider-Man problem. The story teller has great power and it needs to be handled with great responsibility. Now, what are these powers? The first power is the story itself. And therefore, the question a storyteller needs to ask is, how do I circumvent the danger of telling a single story, of sharing a single perspective? The second power is the audience's inherent predisposition to become disempowered. I think this is something that we've learned. We've learned to disempower ourselves as an audience. Perhaps I don't know whom is to blame for this. The kind of films we watch. I don't know. I mean, the kind of theater we watch. As they could, as the audience could be so emotionally involved while listening and watching, that they might lose their ability to reason, to reflect during or even after the story. So what can the storyteller do to create the required distancing? It's not my word, it's a Brechtian word, between the performance and the listener. So that while the performance may appeal to the audience's emotion, it also keeps appealing to the sense of reason. And in a storytelling format, that's great, because if it appeals to someone's reason, then someone can, at any point of time while the story is being told, or even after for that matter, ask a question, raise their hand. And that becomes really, really crucial for the storyteller.
The Storied Way Perspective is designed and developed by your Storybag Podcasting Network. Podcasting is a fantastic medium that brings listeners to gather around a story. As the podcasting industry grows by leaps and bounds, we at Your Storybag want to help storytellers, businesses, brands, and organizations leverage the power of narrative. We are not an agency. Instead, you can imagine us as a collective or a cohort that incubates and nurtures emerging story-based podcasts in the airwaves. If you'd like to collaborate, commission, or create your own story-based podcast, reach out to us at podcast@yourstoryBag.com. So, what kind of stories does Kapil tell?
This is the simplest of the questions you asked me. The answer is folk stories and myths. I think folk stories have survived for a reason. And the reason is that they are fictional and fantastical representations of human experiences and everything that makes us human. They are, of course, timeless. They're problematic, layered, onion-like. They don't attempt to simplify human experiences, although we keep attempting to simplify them by presenting morals of the stories. Myths, because they present a geographical and a cultural belief system. And once again, our systems of belief are very complicated, full of possibilities, and very surprising sometimes. I remember coming across myths that come from the northeastern part of India that find similarities to stories that come from Native American Cherokees.
I think I'm one of the few storytellers who champions the use of folk tales and myths in classrooms, living rooms, and boardrooms. Look up my podcast, Goalpost Stories from Around the World, if you want to find some ready to tell stories. I also tell a lot of personal narratives and everyday small stories. Sometimes I use cinema and short films to articulate a point and make sense of the world. there is another thing that Kapil and I agree on of the story choosing the teller. I tell this to my students, to my clients. Very few get the essence of it. So when Kapil revealed the same, I realized I am not alone.
This whole narcissistic aspect really is also quite a, I mean, it's also very empowering in many ways, because I think for me, this whole idea of, so it's a very Harry Potter like statement to make, where, what was that? It's not the wizard that chooses the wand, Harry, it's the wand. Oh, I mean, we all relate to that, and it's very intuitive. And I think that very intuitive journey and making sense of it, the fact that, okay, here's a story, and I'm pretty certain I want to tell the story. At the moment, I don't know why. But from that part to when you start preparing to tell that story, that whole journey of unpacking is the time when you're really, you and this, if you want to look at this story as a person, this person are in a relationship. And you're trying to kind of find meaning. What is it that resonated? What is it that really clicked for you? What is it that from your worldview perspective is something that you want to stop by? What is it that the story wants you to tell the world, and so on and so forth?
Kapil and I both perform for children. We also perform for adults and families where children and adults interact, making it a shared experience. To me, this is a powerful space to hold. Irrespective of the audience one tells to, what is the role of the storyteller today?
To me, the role of the artist is to ask questions of herself and of the world around her. The storyteller needs to be a problem poser, problems that are then embedded as devices, as craft within the performance. And storytellers have a great opportunity to do so, unlike other artists, other performing artists. Most of us find ourselves telling stories to the most curious age groups of our species, children. And you want this group to stay curious, to be empathetic and kind, and yet fearless, to have a problem posing attitude towards life themselves. And that being said, we also need to create and find opportunities to tell stories to the teens, and as this is not enough of this is happening. It seems that both storytellers and educators and parents seem to believe that double digit is the time when children should stop listening to stories, and I think I have a great problem with that. So we need to find opportunities to tell stories to the teens, to young adults, to senior citizens. And unlike most art forms, we find enough opportunities where we aren't just preaching to the choir.
We are both parents to teenagers, and interestingly, we feel alike about telling stories to teens. Kapil is also a children's writer. Even though his stories have come out as picture books, his stories resonate with adults equally. Kapil writes in his mother tongue, and so I asked him to describe his work as a children's writer. As a new writer myself, I'm equally intrigued by his approach to writing for children.
I don't know whether I have an approach to writing for children. I've only written 3 Hindi books so far. And 2 of them were rather accidental. There's a story I love to perform that someone really liked and wanted me to write it, so I wrote it. Someone else liked an act of my poetic venting, and decided to publish that. But this experience of writing in Hindi has certainly given me a sense of vision, a sense of aim. I think it's ironical that even though Hindi is the most widely spoken regional language of this country, it is least read compared to other regional languages. And progressively, less and less children want to do anything with Hindi. And I'm saying this given my experience with uh, primary and middle schoolers and even senior schoolers in urban spaces. And children that come from all kinds of socioeconomic strata. And for that, I blame the custodians of Hindi language. Hindi has suffered a great deal of oppression. The very people who claim to be its custodians have spent the last several decades wounding the language, stunting it, dividing it on religious grounds. They've tried to make it exclusive and have left it poorer and weaker in the process. And the result is that even today's speakers of Hindi language do not identify with it. So here's what I want to do. I want children, and I want to write in Hindi, of course, as much as possible. And I want children to read the kind of Hindi they speak every day. A Hindi that is not afraid of being inclusive, of including Urdu and English. And for me, actually, I cannot differentiate between Hindi and Urdu. But I'd like children to read more of that kind of Hindi that includes English and Urdu and dialects of other languages to get closer to its reader.
In Kapil, we have a storyteller who dabbles in multiple forms of art, where one leads to the other and strengthens it. The one question that always intrigues me about storytelling is, how do storytellers sustain their art? What do we need to innovate, to grow, and evolve?
I think you can answer this better than any other storyteller in this country. With all the amazing work you do as a coach, your work in the corporate spaces, in the social media sector, all of us take great inspiration from that. I like to see myself as a storyteller who works on the fringes. But I can tell you, storytelling has helped me find growth and value in other areas of my work. So my primary source of living comes out of an entity called VDIS. VDIS is a design studio that bridges two aspects of what you may want to call spatial design, brand communication, and architecture. So things like wayfinding, signage, communication within spaces. All these fall under, and all kinds of spaces, public spaces, commercial spaces, residential spaces, institutional spaces. All of this sort of falls under what America likes to call EGD, experiential graphic design. Now, from my experiences in storytelling as a performance storyteller, we found inspiration to do story building during our design research and project analysis work. And a typical visual communication identity of a space we are designing for has become a narrative-based approach. And the essence of a space is always communicated by way of a story. And what this has done is it has made VDIS a very unique design studio in the space of design that we are. My work in the drama and education space, well, that was always a space of stories. But since I've started telling stories, I've also started using storytelling as a device to build context. to build a sense of belief in the big lie that the participants are about to walk into. So storytelling has definitely helped me in growing all the spaces I navigate. Needless to mention, the growth is mutual. Design and drama immensely contribute to the storyteller in me as well.
When you become a storyteller, there is a danger that you'll be trapped in your own story. The thing with this form is that it is not static. So, pushing the boundaries of narrative and how you shape it is critical. How can storytellers grow their craft?
So at the outset, from a craft standpoint, and through your platform, Ritu, I'd like to appeal to every storyteller out there to engage with theatre, to explore theatre, to engage with theatre tools, be part of a theatre workshop, um, get involved in a play, uh, do improvisation workshops. I think this is very crucial as far as the craft of storytelling is concerned. In fact, to me, storytelling is theatre. I often like to call performance storytelling active theatre, as unlike traditional theatre, the audience is not in the dark, and there is no fourth wall. From an art standpoint, storytellers need to make note of how the world around them affects them, what they see as they in their Rosmarra. How does that, whatever they see, they read, they view, how does it affect them? And that affect needs to keep latching on to strands of our narratives. Last but not the least, we need to read stories all the time, as many stories as possible, stories of all kinds, stories, and stories from all perspectives. So if we decide to read the Ramayana, we need to expose ourselves to as many Ramayans as possible. Of course, Ramayana is a bad example because I don't know how many hundreds or thousands of Ramayans there exist. But be it, be it what Valmiki wrote 2000 years ago, or Bhasa wrote in Pratima Nataka, or those several regional versions of of Ramayana that were written from the 13th to the 15th century, or of course Tulsidas, what Tulsidas wrote 500 years ago, or for that matter, what people like Ashok Bankar and Devdutt Patnaik and Amish wrote recently. You see, storytelling brings with it, and I mentioned this earlier, it brings with it the danger of telling a single story. And the storyteller can only circumvent that danger by being appreciative of its multiple perspectives.
To me, a storyteller is someone who is known not just for his choice of story, but what he does with it. I call Kapil one of the bravest storytelling voices of our current times. In his stories, you find a teller who would ask a question that he's troubled or curious about. From strong socio political themes to narratives that weave myth and reality, his storytelling makes you look within and around you. So, where and how does he hone his unafraid voice?
I think the voice of curiosity is never afraid, which is why children are fearless in expressing, isn't it? They are curious, and they're forever asking questions of their world. You could call their voices unafraid. I mentioned earlier that to me, stories are like wands from Harry Potter. They choose you, not the other way around. I think they actually choose that part of you which is curious. And we as storytellers need to find a way to be aware of that, to be brutally honest about that awareness. And by curious, I don't just mean it has to be a story that agrees with you. No, it could well disagree with you in parts as a whole. I'm reminded of a story I love to perform, a story that comes uh, uh, from Rajasthani folklore, and also has similarities to a story from Katha Sarit Sagar. It's a story that is, I mean, it's a story that considers, like so many other stories, that considers patriarchy as normal, uh, objectification of women as normal. And I when I love to, each time there is a moment where where patriarchy is at its very best. Uh, the the objectification of women is strong. I love to step out of the story, uh, and turn around and and be amongst the audience, be one with the audience, and question the story as an audience member. In fact, also question the audience. Uh, and this is actually very similar to to the time when perhaps the folk story concept began, because somewhere the idea of folk stories was to was to subvert the idea of of uh, of traditional stories, where the art was definitely bigger than the artist, because that's the time of the Sautis, for instance, uh, and where the folk teller would 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 challenge, in fact rebel against the story that was being performed. And it would be amazing to see how does the storyteller express her displeasure towards the story she is performing. So stay curious, be aware of the curious in you that the story latches on to, and find a way or ways to express this curiosity in your stories. This could well work out to be a pathway to arrive at the childlike, unafraid voice.
For those curious about Kapil and his work, remember to look up the show notes below. You will find links to his works, his books, and his stories. Finally, here is how you can reach him.
So, children's lit fests and storytelling fests have become very popular features in India now. As far as public forums go, I am generally a part of a few of these festivals every year. Apart from that, I often keep performing at schools and colleges and sometimes at corporate events. I'm not very active on the social media, but this poet in me keeps waking up to vent on social media from time to time. I can also be seen now at a couple of interventions that have become quite dear to me. As part of DST, or Delhi Storytellers Tribe, which is a voluntary group of storytellers, I play a role in co-organizing an event called Kahani Square, which happens at a park called Meghdootam Park in Sector 50, Noida. And the last Sundays of the last 6 months have seen storytellers from across Delhi come and perform stories for the people of Noida. We hope to run this event forever. The other DST intervention is Kahani Thela. Now, this one is a festival on wheels, and we collaborate with non-profits, low-income schools, Basti Vikas Kendras. And once again, we get storytellers from across Delhi to visit bastis and shelter homes and orphanages to perform for children and young people in these centers on 4 winter weekends.
I had a lot of fun putting this episode together. Kapil and I went back and forth to stitch the older interview with new perspectives. He was traveling and neither of us could sit down again to record a new episode, and that would make the old conversation such a waste of time, isn't it? I think he worked more on this episode than me. So thank you, Kapil. Thank you for doing this with me. You really didn't have to, but I'm so glad that you did it. Personally, I really like how it has turned out. The before and after gives a unique spin to the episode and its format. Not to forget that it's always good to revisit some questions and perspectives from time to time and see how we articulate about our work. I hope to do more of this during this podcast. Hi, this is Rituparna. Thank you for listening to the Storied Way Perspective. This is a bi-monthly podcast where you will meet storytellers, influencers, entrepreneurs, coaches, thought leaders, and experts as I ask them what can stories do in the world today. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, Audible, and everywhere else. Look out for the Storied Way Perspective with Rituparna. No matter where you listen to us, please rate, review, and share the podcast. This helps me know you are listening. You can also write to me at podcast@yourstorybag.com. I will wait to hear from you.